Good, bad, or indifferent, I seem to have developed the reputation of featuring nothing but very expensive cars on this show. Now that is not entirely well deserved, especially evidenced by the fact we recently drove not one but 3 Hyundais together. One of them even had a manual transmission, yet very few of you watched those episodes. So rather than me reverting back to my usual something from Germany that's over 100 grand, we're gonna try a different experiment today. We're gonna try something fancy, but this one, instead of the one that has all the stuff in it, I have deliberately asked for the flavor that is the cheapest they make. Right off the bat, one can tell there is a lot more room underneath the hood of this G80, and that is because it is the residence of a 2.5 turbocharged 4-cylinder engine that has both gas direct injection as well as multi-point injection. Now those two systems don't work simultaneously. They work dependent on load of the vehicle and what the driver is asking of the vehicle. That turns into 300 horsepower, comes in at 5,800 RPM, and 311 pound-feet of torque comes in at 1,650 RPM, stays flat all up to 4,000 RPM. That can be attached to anything you want as long as it's an 8-speed torque converter automatic. But where there is a very large deviation from the V6 is there's a choice here in that one can have all-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive. Now, I deliberately went out of my way and asked for a rear-wheel drive, had to wait extra time for it, and that's what this car is here. I still don't have 0 to 60 and VMAX figures for you, but I do have some fuel economy figures. This is significantly better than the V6 in that area, 23, 32, 26 combined. So here's a bit of a surprise, 3,957 pounds, or depending on how you express your weights and measures, 1,795 kilograms. That part isn't a surprise. The surprise is this. The car you and I are driving today with a 4-cylinder is almost 10% lighter than the 6-cylinder with that. And here, oh, look at that. It really wakes up at about 3,500 RPM. Wow, that is quick. I did not expect that much acceleration out of a 4,000-pound vehicle. Now granted, power delivery is a bit different with this engine. It comes in a bit higher in the power band and gets a bit more buzzy, and that's where it's an unusual experience in that you don't feel a loss of power. Yeah, the V6 has more grunt, but you're not driving this and saying, oh my God, I wish I had more power. And what you really notice is that, the sound. It sounds like a 4-cylinder. It just doesn't have that suppleness, both in power delivery as well as sound. So that really is the most tangible difference between the 3.5 and the 2.5. Other than that, both pretty good. As the 4-cylinder relates to underpinnings, there aren't many wholesale changes here. I would call it fine-tuning. Let's start with the brakes, because that's the biggest change. Up front, 13.6-inch diameter rotors as a basis of comparison. That Prestige twin-turbo all-wheel drive V6, 14.2 in the front. Then in the rear, 12.8 here as opposed to 13.6. Then the most obvious change on the outside is the wheels. Yes, they are smaller. There are 2 options on offer, the 18s, which you're looking at, and the 19s. Now, the 19s, I would go so far as to saying they are not attractive. I really wouldn't call the 18s attractive, especially in light of the stunning 20-inch 5-spokes that were on that V6. Perhaps this is the better option in a 4-cylinder, or perhaps try to sweet talk someone at Genesis to get the 20 inches on this car. And then there's another change which I'm confused as to whether we file it under underpinnings or impact driving dynamics, because it does have sort of an impact on the weight. You see, the gas tank is 2 gallons smaller. Oh, and there is one other change. No adjustable dampers like we had in the V6. That aside, the biggest thing you notice is that weight differential. You don't feel as much pitch from side to side. Yeah, there is less control over other planes of motion. Now that we have that out of the way, I will say there is a good balance between composure and compliance. Not enough to the point where you would confuse this with a BMW or even like a mid-level Mercedes. There's a little bit of float when you push it aggressively, but that's not what this car is about. With regard to that balance, you know how I normally give you a spectrum of driving dynamics? Here we got to drill down a bit farther in that spectrum between composure and compliance. This is more about compliance, more about ride quality rather than full-on driving dynamics. The steering setup does pretty much back everything else up in terms of driving dynamics. I will say, if I was being incredibly pedantic, I'd love a little bit more weight to it. Other than that, it works incredibly well with all the other tuning bits that make up the four-cylinder. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game, Mind the Options game, with today's contestant, something we normally don't feature on a round of the game, and that would be the cheap seats in the expensive neighborhood. Put another way, the 2021 Genesis G80 2.5 Turbo 4 rear-wheel drive huge distinction there for a base price of $47,700. To that, we add the paint. Now, you may remember that Genesis has taken to naming their paint colors after exotic ports of call. This one they call Porto Red. I would call it dark burgundy. Either way, it is additional $400. The interior here is like an ivory or a light beige with a two-tone gray at the top. It's good. Like, the color and trim here works almost as well as the super fancy one, but that blue and tan interior we saw in that GV80, that was the one that really knocked it out of the park. I would say the gray doesn't work as well here. And then, believe it or not, there are no other options that have been fitted to this specific car. As much as I would love to see a sunroof, it wasn't added. The only thing we do add is the destination and handling, $1,025, for a total suggested retail price of $49,125. Now, I do need to point a couple of things out. Yes, the 3.5 twin-turbo V6 Prestige all-wheel drive, 20 grand more. But that one, it had the Napa leather, the 16-way seats, the 3D gauges, all that kind of stuff. This one doesn't have any of those things, but it does have the 12-way seats, which are comfortable, not as comfortable. Doesn't have a leather interior, but the color and trim is really nice, although I don't like the piano black trim. Really miss the satin wood that they have in that other car. And then there are the gauges. This is a bit of a surprise here. If you remember, the very fancy one had these like super flash gauges that were sort of 3D, not as flash as in the Mercedes S-Class or the Maybach. But this, it has old school, regular needle analog gauges. And if it were me, I would vote for the regular gauges. Matter of fact, not just here, how about an option for the regular gauges in the Prestige? If you could do that, it would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so it's time to understand those brakes, pushing a bit more aggressively, more than most Genesis owners would. And there is good pedal feel here. I gotta say, just as an aside, this is an overactive seatbelt. Same thing happened in the GV80 as well as the G80 6-cylinder. I pushed aggressively on these roads. It really does like to hold you in safety to the point where it's almost intrusive. Anyway, enough of the overactive safety doodads. There is really good pedal modulation here. If push came to shove, yeah, it's a little bit less stopping power, but not anything one would notice. This is good, and it's good for a couple of reasons. Yeah, there's the obvious, how does it compare against the car we already drove? That's got the V6, all-wheel drive, the fancy suspension, the better looking wheels, and the super flash interior. There, I am really having a hard time saying yes to the extra 20 grand. Yeah, that car was nice, but this is that good of a package where I'd probably say no to the extra 20 grand. And then there's the other reason why this is good. As a four-cylinder, mid-size luxury car, this is a better execution of that equation than in the Mercedes or the BMW. Meaning in the Mercedes and the BMW, you kind of need the 6. This one, you don't need the 6. So with that, I am going to leave you with a wish list. Number one, perhaps I'm being pedantic, but I'd love different design wheel options. Number two, I don't care if it's the cheapest flavor, you do need a sunroof in a car that costs 50 grand. And then number three, I'd love some choices other than piano black. I get it, you're trying to save the satin finish wood for the fancy car. Not mad at that. But how about like aluminum trim in there? Just the piano black, it takes away from all the beauty of the color and trim that works even in the cheap car. And then last but not least, please, oh please, oh please, change that steering wheel. I don't care if it's the cheap one, the expensive one, the G80, the GV80. That steering wheel looks like you lifted it from a used Crown Vic from a New York City taxi. It just has to go. Please, oh please, change it. Hopefully I have not been unclear. And with that, have I left off anything that should be on the wish list? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, until I see you in the next episode, Bish Beta.